Welcome to the Gadsden Arts Center and Museum and our Summer 2017 exhibition, Florida's First Highwaymen. This audio tour will feature the story of the early highwaymen, including the two original highwaymen, Harold Newton and Alfred Hair, and their mentor, AE Backus. In the early 1990s, Florida art collector Jim Fitch, while on the lookout for a uniquely Floridian painting tradition, wrote an article about a group of African American artists from the Fort Pierce area who were painting the Florida landscape and selling them out on the road, door to door. He called them the Highwaymen, and the name stuck. Though named in the 1990s, the Highwaymen's story begins in the 1950s, when two young black artists met a white regional landscape painter, AE Backus. Backus embraced art at a young age. His ancestors were actors and musicians, and his mother nurtured the arts in her children. He studied art in New York City at the Parsons School of Design, and continued painting even while in the Navy during World War II. However, outside of those experiences, Backus remained in the Fort Pierce area, where he was born, for most of his life. Growing up surrounded by natural Florida, he took the lessons he learned about Impressionism and plein air painting, French for in the open air or outdoors, and applied them to his interpretations of Florida's untouched natural world. If you take a closer look at his works, you'll see these vibrant paintings depicting Florida's unspoiled natural landscape. The splendid sunset with rich warm colors that shine in Florida sunsets, the poinciana trees in early summer on the river that explode with color every spring and fall, and the contrasting colors of the trees and grass of pines in the backcountry and snag in the distance, with the blue skies and cottony clouds. Backus excelled at capturing the emotive quality of Florida's landscape with impressionistic brushstrokes. He did not often feature people in his art, choosing instead to focus primarily on the natural world that was rapidly disappearing as Florida's population grew. However, in one of the pieces from this exhibition, people are a subject of his art. On the right front side of the gallery, you'll find Backus's Marble Game. In this piece, Backus portrays 1950s Avenue D, the main commercial street in Fort Pierce's segregated black neighborhood. The 1950s were volatile years for race relations in the U.S., as schools became integrated and the civil rights movement fought for equal rights and to end racial segregation and discrimination. In Fort Pierce, people like AE Backus were rare. Due to Jim Crow laws that required segregation in public areas, Backus was arrested for frequenting a jazz club in the black neighborhood, where he went simply because he loved jazz music. Backus was welcoming to all people. In his studio, he literally always kept the door unlocked for anyone to stop by for a drink, to eat, to talk about art, and to watch him paint. Artist Livingston Roberts said that he treated everybody he met just like they were family. Backus's interest in inclusion is not only evident in his life and in his studio practice, but also in the subjects that he chose to depict, such as in the Marble Game. It was because of Backus's dedication to inclusion and his open studio that artists Harold Newton and Alfred Hair, the two original highwaymen, began painting luminous Florida landscapes. Backus's style and subject matter became a springboard for Newton, Hair, and their friends. Some, like Newton, aimed to develop exceptional technical skills like Backus, while others, like Hair, took the essence of the Florida landscape and simplified it, striving to make as many paintings as possible and sell them as quickly as possible. Now, although Harold Newton was the first to meet Backus and the one who started the door-to-door business model, I want us to first look at the pieces by Alfred Hair. With an interest in art from a young age, Alfred Hair displayed such artistic talent by the time he was in high school that his instructor, Zenobia Jefferson, introduced him to the premier regional landscape artist that would become his mentor and friend, AE Backus. Despite this close relationship, you may notice that the two artists' portrayals of the Florida landscape are considerably different. Ironically, of all the highwaymen, Alfred Hair's process and technique deviates the furthest from Backus's, while he was the only highwayman Backus considered to be his protege. For Hair, speed is what dictated his style. He wanted to be a millionaire by the age of 35, and to do so, he needed to sell a lot of art. In the time that it took Backus to paint one landscape, Hair would complete 10 pieces, selling them for $25 compared with Backus's $250 or more. In order to accomplish this, Hair tacked multiple sheets of Epsom board to strips of wood. In doing this, he could work on more than one painting at a time, moving from board to board with each color, changing the details slightly from one to the next. This assembly line method combined with this consistent imagery, led to a body of work that stands out stylistically from other highwaymen work. Looking closely at his three works on the right side of the gallery, we can see the quickness in his brushstrokes, or rather his palette knife strokes. To create the effect of moss and grass, Hair scraped the paint across the surface in longer strokes, often with one swipe, without applying more paint. He also followed similar patterns in each composition, with a landmass jutting out from one or both sides of the painting, grass in the foreground, and a single bent tree with a little more detail than the other areas, protruding from the middle ground. He wasn't always concerned with accurate reflections in the water, and his skies are softer and more smoothly blended than the land. Hair's swift techniques led to his distinctive style, which became the most streamlined view through a car window of the Florida highwayman landscapes. What is particularly interesting about the difference between Hair and Backus's works is that Hair is the only highwayman who ever received direct instruction from Backus, and yet his works are the most dissimilar from Backus's. Hair never heeded Backus's advice to slow down, and because of that, he developed his own unique landscape tradition and became one of the two original highwaymen. The other artist who is considered an original highwayman is Harold Newton. Newton also had an early interest in art. He created drawings for newspaper contests in his early childhood, painted portraits in 7th grade, and eventually painted religious scenes on velvet, which he sold to churches door to door and on the roadside. Though he was born in Gifford, Florida, he spent most of his childhood in Tifton, Georgia, where he first started selling these religious paintings. When he returned back to Gifford in Florida, he did not find as many buyers interested in these religious scenes. Around this time, Newton met AE Backus and started painting the Florida landscape and discovered that Floridians and tourists wanted to purchase them. Like Hair, Newton painted faster than Backus, though not quite as fast as Hair, and sold his artworks at a lower price than Backus. Now, Newton never received formal instruction from Backus, but when you stand and look at his works compared to Backus, you can see a direct influence in the styles and subjects. Backus is light, his voluminous clouds and tall, thin pines can be seen in Newton's works, such as in Backus's Snag in the Distance, compared with Newton's untitled work directly to the right of it. Fellow highwayman James Gibson once said, "You can put Harold's and Mr. Backus's paintings together and you'd be surprised." Backus's studio manager said that Newton would drop by the studio, see a landscape, go home, and come back to the studio with a completed replica in as little as 2 hours. Newton strived to be the greatest artist in the South, taking a lot of care and time into his pieces, which appear less formulaic and more detailed than those by Alfred Hair and later painters who favored Hair's style. Many of the other highwaymen admired Newton, and Newton, like Backus, became a mentor to them. Artists would often come to watch Newton paint and learn from him, but he rarely gave advice. Artist Willie Daniels, who has 2 artworks in the lobby, said the most advice he ever received was when Newton told him to lower his horizon line. And by lowering that horizon line, or raising it, that is how you create a more dynamic composition so the line is not right in the middle. A little further down, past the works by Harold Newton on the left side of the gallery, you'll see 3 works by Roy McClendon. Although many of the highwaymen learned informally from Backus, or in Hair's case directly from Backus, Roy McClendon never learned anything directly from him. Rather, McClendon thought that learning from Newton was enough. It was said that in Roy's eyes, Harold was just as good as Backus and sometimes better. In this set of pieces by McClendon, we have a poinciana tree, easily spotted with its bright red blossoms. Poinciana trees bloom in spring and fall and are common in the Fort Pierce area. Backus has a painting of the same type of tree at the front of the gallery, and several artists were known to paint them frequently, including the one on the opposite wall of the gallery by Al Black. Now, Al Black is an interesting part of the highwayman story because he did not begin working with the group as an artist. He's widely regarded as the best salesman of the highwaymen, and at the beginning, all he did was sell. Black was a savvy businessman and took pride in his ability to sell paintings to white customers. At the beginning, Black sold paintings for Alfred Hair, but soon began selling for other artists, all at around a 30% commission. Because the highwaymen painted so quickly and wanted to sell quickly, often the art that Black was transporting was still wet when it was sold, and sometimes artworks were damaged on the trips. Black repaired these pieces, mimicking brushstrokes and mixing colors to find the right match. After artist Alfred Hair was killed in 1970, a tragedy which struck the heart of the community, Al Black began painting and selling his own artworks. To the right of Al Black's pieces is a work by Livingston Roberts, who was one of the first of 3 artists to follow Newton and Hair in the rapidly produced landscape tradition. The other 2 were Roy McClendon and the artist on the back wall of the gallery, James Gibson. Let's take a closer look at James Gibson's pieces on the back wall because they are an excellent example of how some of the highwaymen would paint in bouts using prescribed imagery. In the left and right of these 3 pieces, you'll notice several similarities. In each, the horizon line is at nearly the same level. On that horizon is a shadow of land that meets a bright reflection of the moon. The moon's glow is hidden in the sky above, tucked behind these mossy branches of a tree that projects from the right side of the landscape. The gradient of the sky goes from white to a greenish teal to a warm neutral color near the horizon line. In the foreground, a bright green and yellow line of grass stands in the front of a black line of grass. A single palm tree is featured in the middle of the foreground on both pieces. On the leftmost piece, the tree leans from left to right. On the rightmost piece, the tree leans from right to left. By looking at the numerous similarities between these 2 pieces, you can see how Gibson could have easily painted both of these pieces at the same time. Gibson was also known for regularly painting these night scenes or nocturnes. To the right of James Gibson's pieces are 3 works by Sam Newton, brother of Harold Newton. Sam is often called the defiant highwayman. Because there was no official group, and the highwaymen were named after both original highwayman artists, Harold Newton and Alfred Hair, had died, Sam Newton doesn't agree with calling it a group at all, and prefers to be seen as an individual artist. He also rejected the speed painting of Alfred Hair's group, preferring to take more time on his individual paintings. He is one of the few artists who still paints today and sells his works in a gallery on Merritt Island, Florida. The last artist that we'll take a look at is the only female of the 26 highwaymen inducted into the Florida Artists Hall of Fame, Ann Carroll, whose paintings are to the right of Sam Newton's. Carroll first saw Harold Newton's flame-painted car in the early 1960s, and after watching him paint, she started to learn from him and began making her own paintings. Carroll had the first of her 7 children at age 16, but even before her marriage ended in divorce in 1976, she was the primary provider for her family. As such, her drive to be an artist was not like Hair, who wanted to be a millionaire, or Newton, who wanted to make a successful living as the greatest artist in the South, but rather to provide for her family. After a hard day of selling paintings, many of the highwaymen would go out drinking at Eddie's Bar, a local juke joint, but Carroll worked additional jobs and went home to take care of her family. All of the highwaymen faced racial discrimination in their efforts to make a living as artists, but Carroll also endured gender discrimination to become just as successful as her male counterparts. The highwayman business model, with imagery inspired by the landscapes of Backus, Newton's door-to-door technique, and Hair's rapid production, created new opportunities for these young African-American artists to realize their own American dream. They made a good living as landscape painters despite the racial barriers of the time. Without ever having made an official artist group or school, the highwayman model inspired over 24 artists, some for a short while and some still to this day. Though there were many others who were labeled or called themselves highwaymen, this group was the core, there at the start, visualizing Florida's landscape in a sketchy and suggestive manner. Unlike some landscape painters who depicted romantic, idealized, and grand views of the natural landscape, the highwaymen painted an attainable paradise. They captured the light, the color, and vibrancy of Florida's unique landscape in a way that appealed to tourists and to the numerous new Floridians in search of original art for their homes in paradise.